Hey there. So I'm super pumped because this week I am restocking my Sew Your Own Pocket Altar zines. I'm also restocking the kits for these zines, and those kits sold out over the holidays. So these will be all in the shop on Thursday, April 30th. You can sign up for my newsletter to figure out what time that happens. And I had some people asking to learn more about the process of making the zine, of making zines that coincide with workshops or teaching specifically, as that's how I'm most familiar with working with them as a teacher. But I suppose this method could very much be used with any small book project. So here is my process for creating my zines. First, I want to share some of my inspirations for making these little self-published zines, these little booklets. So the ones that really lit me up to write my own, which unfortunately, many of my favorites are hiding out somewhere in the studio, so this part is less robust than I'd planned. But first off, this zine by Brittany Wood Nickerson, illustrated by Chelsea Iris Granger. I can't find my copy because I bought it in like 2015, I want to say. And this was one of my favorite resources for learning about herbalism when I was early on in my journey. And I had this moment of like, how much more valuable this book is than so many of the other herbalism books I tried and read before. Not because of any difference of information, but it was more like the tone. It felt warm and inviting and specific in a way that books just never are. And I wanted to start to offer the same to go along with my own workshops. And I still try and include this like very warm and inviting tone into the books that I write because I noticed this difference. So the next one is by Lizzie Silva. She's a friend of mine and I just love her style. We're both very much into the same things, textiles, the same kind of 70s inspiration, and her hand illustrations are such an inspiration, her hand lettering, everything. I also love how interactive her zine is. So it has these sections on like space to do your own thing. I doubt this one is in print anymore. She is still making art, but this zine got turned into a book. So that is probably where you can find everything that you can find in this book in this zine is in her book. And lastly, how a photo and video sharing social, blah, 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 blah. This is by Cody Cook Parrott. So this one wasn't specifically like a huge influence, but I share it as a way to kind of give a shout out to Cody, who invited me to their residency, I believe the same year that the zine came out. It was Center Residency 2018. And at the residency, there was a whole shelf of zines that were hugely influential and whose names I can't remember. And just the experience opened my mind up to so much more of how we can kind of build what we want. And I think this line really actually did speak to me a lot. This is just a run-on essay. I decided there will be no sections or chapters, or maybe they will, but they won't go in order or anything. It was just like, oh, wow, I can do whatever I want in these pages. Even though it was before I ever published a book, it just felt really freeing. And I did want to mention Cody's new book, The Practice of Attention. This really helps to peel away all the noise and distractions. It's not a zine, it's a published book, but it's what I'm using to help me sort out my current projects and start to get clarity on writing future books and zines. So maybe that'll help you as well. And then I just shared these were some zines that I picked up along the way that didn't necessarily influence teaching through zines. These are very much, this one I think is basically images only. But I loved the way the pages were different colors. This is by Emma Shavik. I picked this up at like a zine fair in the city a long time ago. But yeah, just as like sources of inspiration. And then a zine can also just be like pure words. This is an interview. This is The Wild Unknown. That's Kim Kranz. This is an interview on meditation. And then this one is also just images. Oh my God, I love the picture so much. Also just images, collages, and hand drawings mixed together. And this one's called New Mystics by Together Gallery in Portland, Oregon. And then this is Lakes by Liz Walsh. Again, these are unrelated to my zine. I just really like the way that word can encompass so many different types and styles of books. Okay, now let's jump into my process, going from a class syllabus to a guided, focused process in a book format. So like laying that out, illustrating it, getting it from a document to a booklet. So to start with, I always have a good idea of what I want to include in the step-by-step because usually I've already created a workshop on the topic. And sometimes I've already taught that workshop once before, and I know what needs to be put in, and I know what questions people ask, and I know kind of what I want to add in to help people independent of my workshop format, so that anybody could just go and pick it up off of a shelf somewhere and go through it as its own independent option as well. I don't have to be sitting there with them teaching them. And so I had my format for the table of contents. I knew what sections I wanted to include in the workshop. So then once I got my table of contents, I just started writing into each of those sections. So I just opened up a document. I use Notion. I opened up a document and I put all of those sections as headers, and I just started writing underneath each header, adding new sections as I saw that they were needed, mixing things around if I felt like things were in the wrong order, copying and pasting anything that I'd already written, like instructionally for the workshop, because instructions are always going to be the exact same. Like the how-to sewing instructions are going to be the exact same. But getting a chance to re-explore some of the other elements in it, like I have this gallery of pocket alters that I thought was really fun to design into and talk about. So like really seeing how the pocket alters work as a place for symbolism. So once I wrote these out, what I usually do is I'll draw a bunch of rectangles on a piece of paper and sort of allocate like the amount of words and that I think each page would need based on how much I've written, and really starting to see how things work like that. It can actually help to open up an 8 by 5.5 or whatever the size of the document you want the size of the paper to be. Open up a page about that big and start copying and pasting some of the text in, so you can start to get an idea of like how big of a paragraph each page can fit. Because depending on how you're looking at your screen, what font size you're using, all that stuff, what your margins, like how far you want the words to be away from the edge, you can really kind of go off of that. So anyway, doing that, putting that together, and then I make these rectangles and I label them with headers, all the headers that I have, and about how much text I will need for each one. So this part is really important if you are doing a staple bound book, as this is. I love staple bound because it lays flatter than perfect bound, but they do require the pages to be in counts of 4. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 for each sheet of paper. So you need to design within that. So I like doing the artwork on the first 2 or last 2 pages. That way I can kind of play around with page count and I don't have to worry about it. I also think it looks better in the front to have like this artwork spread, but it helps me. So for example, I needed 1 more page to complete the multiples of 4, so the inner back cover has this artwork as well. And so by being able to map out the book on this tiny page format, I can start to see the overall flow of the concepts. I can see how many illustrations I'll need. I can see how many pages I need for each section. And I can start to see like, wow, I went from that section to that section. I feel like something needs to be explained in the middle of that. And if there's a section like the gallery of pocket alters where I know I'm going to need a lot of images, I'm going to make the text, even though it's only like 5 small paragraphs, I make the text take up a lot more pages. So instead of having like 3 paragraphs a page, I would just have like 1 paragraph a page. So that way I have space for my larger illustrations to describe what I'm explaining. So let's talk about the illustration process. So to get the vibe for the illustrations before I start any of the other illustrations, I just start drawing. So in this instance, I just started drawing what I felt like the mood of the book was. So some textural elements, some border elements, and I knew I wanted interesting borders on everything. So I made a few elements for borders. I knew I would need some like iconic figurative imagery to include in the book, and so I drew a bunch of these. And then as I started to draw those, I started to see a style develop, and I started to draw more into that style. And through this process, I'm naturally eliminating some of the ideas that I've already drawn. Even if I love them, I'll save them for another book if they didn't really match. But knowing that they helped me to get to where I needed to be. So drawing more into that style, expanding on that, and then when I get ready to do the final illustrations for the instructionals, I'm able to do the instructional illustrations in a similar style. And so that way the book has a real cohesive aesthetic without having to like obsess over it too much. Like it's all about kind of getting started first. And then I started to fill in the how-to. So any of the illustrations that I really needed to explain what was going on, or illustrations that supported a concept. Like, let's say I was talking about how to think about each area of the altar as like designing into the space as like a spell that you're casting. So drawing different shapes of pocket altars and how and having to illustrate the concepts that I'm teaching there. And throughout this whole time of like doing the writing and the illustrating, I am dropping things into my final document, but I'm not dropping the final writing in. So I kind of like, I drop my initial writing in there knowing that it's going to be changed a bunch. And that's so that I can just start playing with fonts, looking at different fonts with different illustration styles. But I don't want to have to constantly be going back and forth from my document to the final book illustrations. It's like I just kind of drop in a temporary text so that I know kind of what's there. And then I'll put the real text in at the very end. So I do this all in Canva. And what I love about Canva, and you can probably do this in InDesign too. So I've used InDesign for many years, and that's what I used to use for making my zines. But what I love about Canva is that it's really easy to do things like erase the background of an image or change all of the text to match. So like any instance that you have one text, let's say I have a text for my header, it'll give you the option to change all of those fonts across the board. So if I'm like, I kind of want to change all of the headers in InDesign, I think you can do something like that in InDesign. I just don't remember how to do that in InDesign, and I have to look it up each time. So I love using Canva because it just like says it right there. And same thing. So like this is a black and white book, but let's say this was a color book, and anytime I wanted to change, I was like, okay, you know what? That green is printing a little too dark. I want to change it to be a little bit lighter, and I can easily change all occurrences of that green through the book. And again, I'm sure there's a way to do this in InDesign, but I have to look it up each time. But in Canva, it just has the option like right there, ready to go. This is not sponsored, it's just a program I love to use. Although, hey Canva, you want to sponsor me? Meanwhile, I've got my document in Notion with my headers that I'm writing into. And when that starts to feel cohesive and like I've explained everything properly and it all flows when I'm reading it in one piece, then I go ahead and copy and paste that into my Canva document, and I make sure I replace all of the text. Even if I think I haven't made any edits to a section, I just make sure everything is the latest text, and I do that one time. So once I've gotten all my illustrations in, I've updated all my text, to start to wrap this up, I then print out all the pages. So since this is a letter size, I print them out 2 per page, and then I fold them. I don't like actually do it this way. I usually have where it's like just printed 2 per page instead of 4. And then I fold them and I clip them with binder clips, and I go into my living room and I just sit on my couch, which is just like a more receptive zone for me. It's outside of my workspace. It's away from my computer. I'm able to kind of see it with new eyes, and I read through the book and I make any notes directly onto the pages. So this part is so important because getting it into your hands really is a different experience. You catch things you wouldn't catch on a computer by sitting down with it and reading it in a different space. You can also make sure your images are high enough resolution by doing this. So that's a really important step. Once I've done all those edits, I read through it like 1,000 more times at different times a day. And this is again why I love Canva, because I can be like waiting at the doctor's office or whatever, and I can open up Canva on my phone. It's on the cloud. I can proofread it again. There is usually like a week at least between when I'm done and when I send it to the printers. I do a lot of rereading. I like to think about the flow of the materials at night before I go to sleep. This is like my magic time where my brain goes like, oh, you know what? It needs another section there, or those 2 sections need to be flipped. That makes so much more sense. I like figure out a lot right before I go to sleep. So I consider if the illustrations are detailed enough. I'm always catching little inconsistencies in this week-long time period. So I really try not to rush, and I try to read the book as though I've never encountered the lessons and I'm learning it for the first time. And that's really important. Like look at it with like totally new eyes. And then after one final printout at home, I very scarily press the send button to the printer. And I try not to panic when I open the box, because one time the printer I use glued the covers on backwards. Yeah, that happened. But they reprinted it for free. I just really hated seeing all that wasted paper. So that is how I went from a bunch of words and drawings to the final version of my Sew Your Own Pocket Altar zine. You can grab your copy starting this Thursday at mixedcolor.net. The link to that is below. And if you're watching this in spring 2026, you can grab your own Pocket Altar kit on Thursday at the link below as well. And I will be sending out an email when these listings are live. So be sure to be on my email list if you want to get one of those. Okay. I will be back on Thursday with another video about how I love to use pocket alters and a few of the ones I've made, and details on them, and just like, yeah, just how I got into it and what drew me to it. So yeah, I will see you then. Thanks for watching. Oh, and I think this is the point where I'm supposed to ask you to like and subscribe, I guess.